Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. I'm excited to have a returning guest here, Matt D'Antuono. Did I pronounce that right, or did I totally butcher it? Yeah.
D'Antuono. I usually don't do the O part on the first O, but it's probably closer to what they actually said in Italy, like D'Antuono, something like that. But here in America, we say D'Antuono.
D'Antuono, I like it. On our first interview, I probably just skipped over your last name at all. And
yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, I sometimes do that. You know, it's my little sneak.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's great to have you back on. So how you been? And thanks for joining me.
Good. Doing well. Approaching the end of the school year here in New Jersey. We're not actually done yet. We're a little bit behind the rest of the country, but last day of school tomorrow for me. The end of June, but we start in September, and so I'm excited about this third book that was published, Philosophy Fridays.
Yes, and that's what we're going to talk about, Philosophy Fridays. It's funny because I do an occasional segment on the show called Philosophy Fridays. So how about that? Okay. I think we found a great episode for that segment, which is this one. So for people who may not have heard our first chat, Matt, you are a physics teacher, yet you also have a degree in philosophy. So give us the brief background of who you are and how you got to be doing all this stuff, and then we'll get into the book.
Yeah, well, in high school, I was, a good student. I took physics my senior year. Didn't have to, but I took it. And then I was taking calculus at the same time and really just fell in love with physics. I was always good at math, but didn't enjoy it. And then physics, I found some way to really apply it. It actually worked for describing the world. And I wanted to major in physics. I thought about being a physics teacher. And so I got a degree in physics. After college, though, after having an encounter with Christ, really in the Protestant setting, though, worked with Athletes in Action, which is a Protestant interdenominational ministry. Then found my way back into the classroom teaching math, and then at a private Christian school where I was let go when I became Catholic. And then, since my degree was in physics, started teaching physics in the public school system in New Jersey. But along the way, after graduating with the physics degree, got interested more and more in philosophy. So I worked on a philosophy degree, a bachelor's philosophy degree at a school here in Jersey. And now I have the privilege of working on a master's in philosophy with Holy Apostles in Cromwell, Connecticut.
Indeed. Yes. Our both of our school. Indeed.
That's right. Right. And it's my first experience actually working on a degree in a Catholic school. I was public school all the way through, worked at the private Christian school, but then in the public school system here. And both of my degrees were at state schools, one in Virginia, this one in New Jersey. So it's really nice to be in a Catholic setting with like-minded people getting in depth about, Catholic theology and philosophy.
I agree, man. It's the first time ever in my life. I'm a product of public education as well, where I'm actually excited about schooling and not frustrated about it.
Right. Yeah.
It's so refreshing. But so I will refer people back to our previous conversation where we talked a little bit more about your journey into philosophy and your journey into the Catholic Church as well. That was an absolutely fascinating story to hear, and so I'll be sure to link that in the show notes so people can get caught up if they haven't heard that first one. But I want to talk to you about this new book you're writing because it's really cool. And I think what you're doing in general is really cool. So you teach physics, but every Friday you kind of do a philosophy jam session with your students, which is just, that's awesome. So how did that start? How did that tradition come about?
Well, I was working on my philosophy degree at the school here in Jersey, the bachelor's degree, and teaching physics at the same time. So it comes out in conversation. Students are inquisitive, so they ask questions and we talk about things. It's a great thing. I enjoy it. And then it came out that I am working on a degree in philosophy, and the students are like, well, what is philosophy? So I'm trying to tell them about some of the topics in philosophy. And then the next question is, can you teach us some philosophy? And I'm like, well, I'm a physics teacher, but I guess I can throw a little bit of philosophy in there, or we have conversations about the nature of science. What is science? Can science answer these questions? And then I'll tell them, be like, by the way, this is not science right now. We're actually doing philosophy, talking about science. And so we always, as teachers, we're supposed to start off class with some interesting question or something to get the students thinking. And sometimes I would do brain teasers. So what I decided to do was then from time to time do a philosophy thing, just a brief quote or a dilemma, some type of philosophical idea, just to start off class, brief thing, 5 minutes, nothing much more than that. And then I would be good. We'd do it for a few days and then I'd forget and the students would want to do it again. So we just sort of decided, each Friday we'll do a philosophy thing. It had a nice ring to it anyway, right? Philosophy Friday. It's the end of the week, something a little bit less pressurized for the students. And that was it. It must have been like 7-8 years ago, and it just turned into a tradition. And since then, students have really given me good feedback. They've said that I've even had a couple months into the school year, students say something like, wow, I feel like I just think differently now. Wow, that's great. It's really cool.
And it's not only turned into a tradition, you've turned it into a book. And I'm looking at the table of contents. It's really cool. It's one of those table of contents where you're just excited to hop to every chapter and be like, oh, well, what's the answer to this question? So I got to about chapter 3, which is Have You Seen the Number 2? And I'm really digging it so far. It's a great style. It's a great presentation, very conversational. So well done, my friend. And I'm going to try and I'm going to poke you a little bit here because I want you to spill some of the content with me because I'm so curious about this project. So, but even before, I guess were you kind of starting with your students more on specifically like philosophy of nature and philosophy of science, and then you just kind of expanded from there? Is that how that went?
Yeah. I mean, at first we were talking about the philosophy of science and the nature of knowledge, what it means to know, that kind of thing, because I was trying to stick to physics. But then I got a little braver and we started branching out. And so, I mean, one of the things that we talk most about really, I think probably the majority of the discussions are ethics, because that's the thing that they can relate to the most. You can put them in an ethical situation. It's a little tough to lead them into something like metaphysics, but I try to. And I mean, that's like the one about the number 2. That is a little bit of metaphysics I'm trying to get them to think about. Metaphysics and kind of the nature of the humanity, how it is that we can know about mathematics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing how because I took a lot of math. I didn't take a whole lot of physics. I was an econ and finance major, so I took a really good amount of math.
That's right, yeah. It's
amazing how little philosophy of mathematics I actually got through my college experience. So I think it's great that you're offering this to your students, because I think it'll give them, if nothing else, a whole bunch of new and interesting things to think about, but hopefully a lot of conceptual clarity, because that's the point, right? Like, I'm sure some of your students probably ask, well, you know what? Well, you tell me, right? Like, have your students held certain misconceptions about philosophy? Like, well, what's the point of philosophy anyway? We've got physics. Isn't philosophy just a bunch of logic chopping? And doesn't philosophy just confuse people? What's the general sort of attitude, I would say, that your students have coming in?
I would say the most common attitude is really one of ignorance. They just don't really know what philosophy is about. If they have any idea about it, the general idea, if there is one, is something like, almost like this mysticism, or just sort of dreaming up crazy ideas, just trying to mind blow people. Like, what if we don't really exist? Whoa, like, that's philosophy, man. And I'm like, no, actually, we're trying to seek truth here and, talk about reality. So trying to ground it a little bit. But yeah, for the most part, I would say they have either no idea, or they think it's just asking these deep questions without really finding answers, just sort of like enjoying the asking process and dreaming things up.
Yeah, just wondering if you're stuck in the Matrix was, of course, a conversation that was going on in a Facebook group again today. I'm like, we're still on this one, guys? Seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, so and also, I think it's so cool when we apply philosophy of nature and philosophy of science too, and we start to ask questions
Mm-hmm.
that many scientists that I've encountered that they themselves often don't think about. Like, for example, what is a law of nature? Have you posed that one to your students yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And even to talk about the fact that there are laws and the fact that we can describe nature using mathematics, that that in itself is a mind-blowing thing that I think that is something that quite a few scientists have thought about. There's a famous essay that was written in the 1970s by a guy named Eugene Wigner, and it was published in a science, or actually it might have been a math journal. And the title of the essay was "On the Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Physical Sciences."
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the fact that we can use math in the physical sciences, it's unreasonable. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. There's no necessary logical connection between being able to use math, right, mathematical formulas to be able to describe these laws of nature. It's just a mind-blowing thing. And I'll say that to my students, even we'll derive some, or we'll test some idea, so we've got an equation, and then I'm like, okay, well, let's do a little bit of math, and we're just doing some algebra. We'll get a new formula, and I say, let's test this formula. And then I point out, look, all we did was some math. This is stuff that you could have done in math class, and yet it works to be able to give us something new about nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how often it really sinks in. Maybe with some of the higher level students, like I teach a calculus-based AP class, and I think with some of them, it's able to sink in a little bit more. Just how mind-blowing the whole thing is.
Yeah, and I think so many of us, because I guess if you're coming from a naturalistic, kind of metaphysics, then yeah, of course, this would be unreasonable or alarming or uncanny or
Right.
just an extremely happy coincidence, right?
Right. Yeah.
Of course, we don't think that. We don't think that it's an extremely happy coincidence because
Right.
we believe that the world should be intelligible, and as it so happens, it seems to be intelligible. Yeah. So let's start at the first one. So I love the third chapter that you have on here. Have you ever seen the number 2? Is there a reason you put that one first? Tell us about what you're trying to get at with this one.
Yeah, part of it is to give them something interesting, because I had found in the past that was one that students really enjoyed, and it really got them thinking and really forced them to stop and think, because it's something that they have dealt with, right? You talk about, done so much math, and these kids have learned arithmetic since they were probably before kindergarten, and yet they never thought about this question. So to sort of set them off guard from the very beginning. So it's one of the first ones that I do. And it's always great to watch their faces, because they think that I'm absolutely nuts. Like, what is this guy talking about? As I say, I'm like, this is your question today. Have you ever seen the number 2? And they're like, what? Like, yeah, of course we have. Right. And I'm like, all right, well, where is it? Do you see it anywhere in the room? Yeah, it's on the clock. And then I write 2 on the board. And I'm like, is this the number 2? I'm like, yeah. And then I tell them, well, I've got news for you. This is not the number 2. And at this point, they're like, this guy is really got to be just completely bonkers, because that's definitely the number 2. And then I point out that it's not. It's actually a symbol that represents the number 2. And then it starts to sink in.
Mm-hmm.
So that, it's fun for me too, because I get to watch them in their expressions.
Yeah, as they just sort of perhaps maybe slowly back into the bush, like the Homer Simpson meme that you see on the online sometimes, and then they finally get it. Or maybe they don't get it, but at least it gets them to think a bit more deeply. Okay, we see this symbol, this representation, and you give the nice example in your book of, just because I write dog on the board and we have a representation of it, that is not a dog. But a dog, of course, is a physical, interactive, life form, whereas a number 2 is not. So how far do you press it with your kids? Do you go into do you ask them if they think it's a useful fiction, or if it's nominalism, conceptualism, problem universals? How deep do you go with some of these questions, or do you just kind of like to drop the seed and yep?
Yeah, especially early on, I wouldn't go into things like nominalism and the universalism and that sort of thing. But I just what I do use it for is to point out the fact that the number 2 is something that they've never seen, so it's not itself a concrete thing. And yet we can know about it, and we can use it. So what is the nature of the number 2 that it's not concrete? And then what is our nature that we can know things that are not concrete? And I just kind of leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give them the answer to it, because again, it's a lot of the seed planting, and it's the first time these students are thinking in this way.
Yeah.
So
mm-hmm.
just sort of gently leading them into it.
That's true.
And then to leave it open-ended.
That's very cool. I think you're doing a great service here, obviously, because I wish these were things that my math teachers, if nothing else, it would have made math so much more interesting.
Yeah, right.
So there's a ton of questions in your book, and we're not going to be able to get through them all, obviously, nor do I want to, because I want people to go and pick up the book and get it. It's awesome. But what are some of the questions, or some of the kind of thought experiments that have gotten the most excited, let's say, reactions from your students? What are some of your favorites to pose to your class every year?
One of the ones that I really enjoy, because they don't see it coming, but I think it's one of the most important ones for them, is, and I kind of got this from a book that came out years ago called Angela's Ashes. So what I do is I ask the students, I tell them, look, you're not going to realize at first how this is a philosophical question, but trust me, I'm going to get there. Mm-hmm. And I say, if you won the lottery, money was not an issue for you, and you bought a mansion, what would you put in your mansion? And I just let them go crazy and dream for a while about what they would put in their mansion. And then I tell them, okay, well, would you allow the town to come and dump garbage in your mansion? You know, garbage is building up in all these places around the world. They need a place to put it. So they just want to periodically dump some garbage into your living room. Would you let them do that? And they look at me like, what? So again, I get a lot of these looks like I'm crazy. Mm-hmm. But by this time in the year, I've built a relationship with them, so they think I'm crazy already, but they trust me a little bit at least.
Sure.
Conversation. And they're like, no, not at all. And I say, they need a place for sewage as well. Would you just let them put a pipe into your basement and pump sewage into your mansion's basement? There's a lot of space down there. It would be helpful. And they're like, no, absolutely not. And then I tell them, your mind is a palace. What do you allow into your mind? And I have had students audibly groan when I ask that question, because they think about it. And I tell them, like, think about what you have, the media, the stuff, the people, the conversations that you have consumed over the last 24 hours. How much of that was like the really good stuff? Mm-hmm. And how much of that was just garbage?
Yep.
And I had a student at the end of the year one time tell me that question really hit home with him. And it is a palpable silence in the room at that point where students are thinking about it.
Chapter 17, what would you put in your mansion? That's a really good one. I mean, what an important lesson for what I'm sorry, you may have mentioned this before and I could just be having a dad moment, but what grade are you teaching again?
So my students are juniors and seniors. So I have juniors in like the regular physics classes, and then my AP class is seniors.
Nice. Yeah. So you're hitting some of them right before they go off to college. So that's great. Yeah. That's great. I mean, you got some big ones in here, Matt. So, I mean, you have the meaning of life stuff. So, and obviously you're in a secular setting. This book seems to kind of take a sort of secular approach as well, but where do you, if you do, kind of draw the line? Because it seems like a lot of these questions would lead you right up to, if not force you to kind of pass a certain theological threshold, if you know what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. Well, oftentimes what I'll do, so even something like the meaning of life, I'll let them discuss it, and sometimes I won't even give them an answer. I'll leave it with what they say. And what I'll do is I'll point out the fact that, you guys are thinking about this, or you're giving these answers, but have you taken into account what other people have said, and to encourage them to realize the fact that there is an answer to this. It's not just whatever they want it to be. Mm. And I tie it back to one of the earliest things that discuss with them that there is truth. There is such a thing as truth. The statement that there is no truth is a self-refuting statement, because if there's no truth in that statement, it's not true. So kind of always tying it back to that, and that as philosophers, we're not concerned with just, dreaming about these questions. We want to know about reality. So when it comes to asking about the meaning of life, is there really some objective meaning? That's what we want to get at as philosophers, not just accept the sort of common relativistic idea that, well, whatever your meaning is, that's your meaning in life. And then, I have my meaning. So not even to give them answers, but even to try to undercut some of their own assumptions. Because a lot of times as I discuss the meaning of life with them, or I ask them to tell me, they'll say things like, oh, each person makes up his own meaning. And then I'll throw something crazy at them. I do a lot of this crazy thing. I'll say something like, well, what if my meaning in life is robbing banks? What if that's what I find meaning in? And then they have to stop, and they're like, oh, well, maybe it's not just whatever you want it to be. Like, exactly, right? So we're getting somewhere. And to point out that there are answers, to try to combat this idea about, oh, we just dream up stuff and then we're mind blown and we say, whoa, man, that's philosophy, and then we're done. Mm-hmm. No, this is a tough thing, and we enter into conversation with the great minds of the past, and we seek the truth above all else, even in something like, maybe most importantly, something like the meaning of life. And I tell them, how much time do you spend, like keeping up with sports and keeping up with celebrities and following your feeds on all your social media, whereas really investigating what is the meaning of life might be more worth your time.
might be, right?
Might be. And sometimes they'll throw it back on me. Not always, but oftentimes they'll say something, well, Mr. D, what do you think the meaning of life is, right? Or how would you answer this question? And then I answer it as well as I can in secular terms. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, you answer it as well as you can so that you keep your job. I get it. Yeah, right, you've already been fired once. You don't need that again.
And I'll tell them something like, to give you a full answer would be to answer from my religious perspective, but to put it in, and I'll tell them, like, this is putting it in secular terms, to become the best version of yourself. Or I'll quote Matthew Kelly, I'll be like, there's a writer, Matthew Kelly, that I like, and
yep. Mm-hmm.
Here's how he puts it. You say to love and to be loved, that sort of thing. But they're aware of the fact that I'm a Christian. That always comes up. Mm-hmm. And that's always a little bit strange for them too, because I'm a physics teacher and at the same time a religious person. And for a lot of them in their minds, those are two things that can't exist in the same person.
Yeah, they just, I guess, assume that common narrative that there's some type of conflict there. And that, so it's great because you're busting a lot of these false narratives and stereotypes. You're helping to undo their relativism, which you've got your pulse on this. How bad is it in a public school setting? Are these kids pretty awash in a relativistic mindset?
It is. Yeah, it's so common that even after repeated discussions on Philosophy Fridays about the objectivity of truth, they will still often fall back into it, especially when it comes to ethical questions. Mm-hmm. Because we'll talk about things, and they'll say, oh, the ethics, it's up whatever you want. So then I'll bring up things like, well, if it is relativistic, then, and I'll say things to them that are some of the worst things you can imagine. I don't have to go into it, but just like, rape or whatever it might be. And, I tell them, if you're going to hold to this idea that it's just whatever you want it to be, there is no standard, then you can't say that those things are wrong. Most of the time, students will sort of start to check when they get to that point. But as crazy as it is, at sometimes I have had like a whole class of students be like, okay, yeah, well, I guess that's not really wrong. I guess that's just something that we don't like.
I had a conversation like that the other day where somebody was, taking back with their right hand what they were, giving out with their other. It is amazing how people will want to simultaneously condemn the imposition of values while themselves imposing that value,
Right.
or advocating for moral progress to be made when they hold a philosophical worldview that would make that entirely meaningless. Okay, maybe there's moral change if you're a relativist, but moral progress doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's talking out of both sides of their mouth almost constantly. But there's like such a commitment among people, and I'm curious if this is true with your students. Like, it's so funny because they think it's so wrong to impose any type of ethical standard. They think that that's so wrong that they feel like they need to remain relativists, no matter what, even if that means trying to admit that like something like rape doesn't have like any true moral status at all as being So it really is incredible how far people will go they only go that far, it seems, because they think that the imposition of values is wrong. Like that is like the new the gravest sin, if you will. It's incredible.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I think a big part of that too is that they haven't ever been challenged to, right, or been told about the fact that they do have these opinions. So many of the opinions that we grow up with, I mean, it's true for all of us, really. Unless you happen to live in like a philosophical household or something like that. The things that we grew up with, and we don't realize we have them until later. And so they wouldn't even be able to identify the fact that they're thinking relativistically. Mm-hmm. And that too is a little bit of a part of what I try to do, is to give names to the things that they can realize what it is that they're thinking, right? So even to take a look at their own mansion, to take a look into their own palace and start thinking about what's there in the first place. And starting to evaluate, hey, this is garbage, I should get rid of this. This is a good thing, I'm going to keep this.
Yeah, and that's great because, you plant these seeds and, over time, one hopes, and I'm sure you've seen it happen, right? I certainly have, and it happened even in my life. Profound changes can come about. Maybe it's a year later, maybe it's 5 years later, maybe it's 10 years later, but somebody will look back and remember that conversation they had with their high school physics teacher. And who knows what type of harvest can be reaped from that. So I think you're doing a great service here. I really do, for so many different reasons we could get into. So give me one more, and then I want to tell people, we can talk about where the best place people could get this book from. What's another fun one that you love bringing up with your students that invites conversation?
Probably my favorite one to do in the end, actually. I just used that phrase and realized that it applied perfectly. It's the last day of class. I give them a full hour lecture on beauty and physics. Mm-hmm. Because throughout the year, and I tell them in the very beginning of the year that one of the reasons that they should learn physics is to see beauty. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the year, and I just gave this talk a few times in my as a last lecture in these classes, I tell them, okay, this is like the final lecture. It's Philosophy Friday and physics like all into one. And I go through sort of the philosophical understanding of objective beauty as it's found in physics, in mathematics, in symphonies, right, in music, in landscapes all over the place. And I try to really, at this point, I do try to convince them that there is such a thing as beauty and that physics is beautiful, and the importance of beauty. So it's a full class lecture, and students are usually pretty engaged. And I even had one student last year, she told me that it really, that lecture really changed the way that she looked at the subjects that she learns. And she was looking forward to coming back her senior year and seeing all of her subjects with this new perspective of looking for beauty.
Yeah. What a cool thing. So, I have a background in music too. And some of the AP classes I took, were AP music theory, my junior and senior year of high school. And it's actually really funny in the sense that music theory is like physics in a way. It gives you structure. It gives you the structure of music, but there's still something missing from that structure, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I am not up on music theory. I have just learned the little bit that I have learned about classical music has changed the way that I've listened to music. So I'm envious of the fact that you've got that training under your belt.
Well, the structure is beautiful, like mathematics, right? I mean, you have the symmetries, and it captures those parts of music that are really kind of quantifiable. Like you can have intervals and chord structures, and it gives you certain rules, and it allows you to make predictions, right, of what's gonna create harmony or dissonance or what have you. But even when you have all the kind of theory, when you've really learned it, there's something still missing from it, right? There's that qualitative dimension that is still missing from it. So in a sense, there's a wonderful parallel there between, and people can see that, like people who understand music and music theory clearly can understand that music theory is not itself all of music, but people seem to make the mistake by thinking that physics itself is all of reality, don't they?
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because in my lecture, I have a quote from Leonard Bernstein, the famous conductor and composer. And I pulled this quote out because he talks about what makes Beethoven different from all the others in the way that he hears the music. And he says that all these other composers have great technique, right? Great structure. They have great skills. But he says all of this is mere dust compared to the one ingredient sought by them all: the inexplicable ability to know what the next note has to be, right? This idea that there's an inevitability. And physicists have talked about that even with something like Einstein's theory of general relativity, this sort of inevitability, this recognition, like, wow, well, of course it had to be that way, right? So yeah, absolutely. The quantitative outline does not encapsulate the whole thing, in music or in physics or mathematics.
But that itself is still a very beautiful thing. It really is.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Man, that's so cool. We'll have to get on. We'll have to do like a jam session just on that at some point, because that's such a cool topic, and I'd love to hear more about it. But in the meantime, where is the best place for people to get a copy of this book? It's your newest, correct? Like this just hit the presses, right?
Yep, that's right. Just a couple of weeks ago. And they can go to En Route Books and Media. That's the publisher, enroutebooksandmedia.com. And then they can click on the links there, and the links will take them to Amazon. And they can buy it as an ebook or a print copy.
Absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to give I can't wait to finish reading this. And I think it's going to give me good material for my children as well. I know we were both talking about homeschooling, so I can't wait to implement some of these questions as well. So Matt, thanks a ton, man. This has been a blast.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat. Good to talk to you again.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.